Good evening. Ready to get started. We're at the very top of Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph, the very top word. And tonight we're going to overlearn just a drop. We're going to go to the Mishnah, which is halfway down on Samech Amud Aleph. And then tomorrow we'll learn a blot in a little bit to get down to the bottom of Samech Aleph Amud Aleph. And then we'll be ready for Shabbos. As a reminder, tomorrow, Thursday, there will be no in-person shiur. I will pre-record in the middle of the day and post accordingly. So we've been discussing a very strange machlokes in the Gemara, and it's the machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Akiva. What is the machlokes? The machlokes is in what direction does the Kohen go around the Mizbeach inside the Heichal? I'm seeing here that the lighting is a little rough for those of you who are on the internet. It's a little better. There you go. So in what direction does the Kohen do the smearing of the blood? Do we go the appropriate direction when you're facing the Aron, you rotate to your right? That's the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. Or do we hold like Rabbi Akiva and we go around the left, which is the backwards way? And as the Gemara explained at the very bottom of Nun Chesem and Beis yesterday, he didn't have a choice because according to Rabbi Akiva, here's what he'd be doing. He'd be walking from the Heichal, from the Kodesh, and he would come to this corner first. But he skipped it because the pasuk said V'yata, he has to pass the Mizbeach. So he passed the Mizbeach. He did the southeast corner and then had to come back. So once he was coming back to the left, he did all of them to the left. That was the Gemara's answer. So then the Gemara says on the top of Nun Tes Amud Aleph, and we're going to learn this sugya for the first half of them. With V'bai Sema, there's another way to explain the machlokes between Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva. Remember, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says to go to the right. Rabbi Akiva says to go to the left. If we're talking about someone who's walking with their feet as opposed to standing still, then within that camp, everyone agrees that if the Kohen Gadol is going to be walking around this Mizbeach, everyone agrees that Yalfinan Panim Michutz, that we do learn about this room, about the inside of the Heichal, from outside the Heichal, from the Mizbeach HaGadol, that just like by the Mizbeach HaGadol, outside, we go in the appropriate order to the right, so to inside. However, here, Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva are having a different machlokes. Says the Gemara, Mar Savar Hakafa B'yad, Mar Savar Hakafa B'regel. Rabbi Akiva seemed to have been of the opinion that he was standing here at the southeast corner, and he wasn't walking, but he was smearing biyadayim. His feet were planted. Remember that this whole Mizbeach inside the Kodesh, inside the Heichal, was 1 amma by 1 amma. If you take your arms and you make a square, that's about how big we're talking. It's about 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet. It's not very large. So Rabbi Akiva would stand right here. He was biyad. He'd stand here, smear, 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 going the wrong way in order to compensate for the ein ma'avir and ala mitzvos concern that we had already passed the southwest corner, and that's why he holds what he holds. Fourth line, Nun Tes Amud Aleph, Umar Savar Hakafa B'regel. Rabbi Yossi Aglili was of the opinion that he was walking with his own 2 feet, and because he was walking, therefore, he started over here. He actually would go to the right. He'd start in the northeast corner and walk around in the appropriate counterclockwise direction. B'Ibay Sema, the Gemara presents another possibility as to how to understand the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Aglili. B'Ibay Sema, everyone agrees, both Rabbi Yossi Haglili and Rabbi Akiva agree that we're placing the blood, we're smearing the blood on the Mizbeach HaZahav with our hands, without walking. Your feet are planted by the corner that you're at. And what we're talking about is just standing there and reaching over and spreading it. So if that's the case, what then is the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Haglili? Mar Savar Yalfinan Yad Miregel. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, whatever we do when we're standing with our feet planted and we're only reaching over with our hands, we still learn the same rules as we would have had we been walking, which is to go counterclockwise to the right of the Mizbeach. However, Umar Savar Lo Yalfinan, Rabbi Akiva says we do not extrapolate from regel to yad. Namely, even though Rabbi Akiva agrees that had he been walking around the Beis HaMikdash, it would then have to be counterclockwise to the right. But since he's standing still, the halacha of going to the right doesn't apply when your feet are planted and you're only reaching over. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva, if he was standing still here, he would just reach over with his hand, 1, 2, 3, in the opposite direction. And that's totally fine because it's yad, it's not regel, your feet are planted, and we only have to go to the right if you are walking. This is actually mashma in the language of the Gemara that we've quoted a couple of times, kol pinos she'atapone, every time you turn a corner, it has to be to the right. But here, you're not turning anywhere. Your feet are planted, so it's meduyak to say such a thing. However, the Gemara rejects this possibility. 7 lines down on Testament Aleph, the Savar Rabbi Yossi Haglili Hakafa Biyad. The way you presented this previous distinction between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Haglili, the way you presented it is that each of them are standing fixed, their feet are planted, and all they're doing is reaching around the Mizbeach. Rabbi Akiva is reaching around clockwise, which is the wrong way, and Rabbi Yossi Haglili is reaching around the Mizbeach counterclockwise, going to the right, which is the appropriate way. Says the Gemara, that can't be. Rabbi Yossi Haglili was not of the opinion that his feet were planted. How do we know? Because B'hamidikatani Seifa, what does the end of our Mishnah say? The end of our Mishnah says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer b'mekomo haya omer umechate. Rabbi Eliezer says in the Seifa that he disagrees with the Tanakama and that he should stand still. What does that imply? Mechlal the Tanakama lo svirale. That the Tanakama does not hold that the feet were planted and he was only using his hands, and therefore Ela machvarta kiddushanin and meikara. Therefore, we reject this most recent distinction between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Haglili, and we fall back on the previous answer, which is that Mar Savar Hakafa Biyad, Umar Savar Hakafa Beregel, that one of them is walking and one of them is just standing still and using his hands. The person who's standing still and using his hands is Rabbi Akiva, and because he's using his hands, he doesn't have to go to the right. He can go in any direction he wants, and he chooses to go to the left because he passed over the corner that really should have been first, which according to him was the southwest corner. And Rabbi Yossi Haglili was of the opinion that he was walking, and therefore, because he was walking, the halachas of kol pinos she'atapone inu elu liyamin, that anytime you're walking, it has to be to the right. Yet another distinction. The Gra here takes out the next 6 words, and he explains that on the next line, we're about 10 lines down, where it says Mar Savar Saviv de Mizbech. It's an explanation of the previous shita, and here is how the Gemara reads: Mar Savar Saviv de Mizbech Pnimi Kis Saviv de Mizbech Chitzon. According to one shita, the way we navigate, the way we go around the mizbeach that's pnimi inside the heichal, this one, the mizbeach hazav, is the same as in regards to the chitzon, and that we walk around it. That's the shita of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who's counterclockwise going to the right. Umar savar kule mizbeach pnimi b'makom chada karen de mizbeach chitzon kai. Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that no, you can't compare the two because this whole thing is 1 amma by 1 amma. That's the size of one of the corners of the Mizbeach HaGadol on the outside. The Mizbeach HaGadol was huge. It was 32 amos. I think it was 32 amos. It was massive. And the corners of the Mizbeach were this 1 by 1 measure. Again, if you extend your arms out in a square, it's about that size. It's a very, very small space. That's what we're talking about here. So Shita number 1 says, we learn which direction we're supposed to walk from the Mizbeach HaGadol, even though it's huge, even though it's literally 32 times as large. However, the second Shita says, you can't even compare them. This is the size of one of the corners of the Mizbeach HaGadol, and therefore you can stand still, which would be the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. And that brings us to a Brisa, which supports this last answer and will basically end this part of the sugya. And we had asked our question yesterday and continued it at the beginning of today, which is what is the difference between the Shita of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Haglili? Why is it that Rabbi Yossi Haglili felt that you had to walk and could only walk counterclockwise to the right, which is appropriate? And why did Rabbi Akiva hold that seemingly your feet were standing together and therefore you could go to the left? Tanya, the Brisa supports this. Amar Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says, Shnei Kohanim Gedolim Nishtayru B'Mikdash Rishon. Wow, could you imagine such a thing? The few Jews who lived to straddle both Batei Mikdash. Now, some unfortunately take out the word Rishon to say that they just were Kohanim. But according to this version of the Gemara, as we have it in front of us, it seems to be that they were of the opinion that these Kohanim lived both in the first and second Beit HaMikdash with a gap of some 70 years. So it says the Gemara, Ze Omer, one of these Kohanim says, Ze Omer biyadi hakafasi. I did it with my hand. Namely, I stood still. Who is this the Shita reflect? Whose Shita does this reflect? This is the Shita of Rabbi Akiva, who stood still and reached over in the wrong direction. Ze Omer beragli hakafti. I actually walked around with my bare feet, and that is the Shita of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Zeno sem tam ledvarav, Zeno sem tam ledvarav, and each of them gave a rationale for their reason. Zeno sem tam ledvarav saviv de mizbeach penimi ketsaviv de mizbeach hitzon. according to the Shita that reflects the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the reason why you have to walk around this Mizbech that's inside the Heichal, the Mizbech Hazav, is because the way that we walk around this Mizbech has to reflect the way we walk around the Mizbech that's outside the Heichal, and therefore, because we walk around that Mizbech to the right counterclockwise, therefore here too, we have to walk around the Mizbech counterclockwise. However, halfway down or almost halfway down, the Zeno Saint Talmud Dvarov, Kule Mizbech Pnimi, the entire Mizbech on the inside, the Makom Chada Kerem Dechitzon Kai. What are you talking about? You don't have to walk around this. That's crazy. Could you just imagine? You tell someone, well, if you have to walk around your house, then you have to walk around your car. They're incomparable. The sizes are so drastically different, and that would reflect the sheets of Rabbi Akiva. That therefore explains the machlokas that we started with today, the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who says that we go counterclockwise to the right, fulfilling our regular rule of kol pinos she'atapona einu elu liyamin, and Rabbi Akiva, who says we don't need to do that because his feet were planted, he was not walking, he was simply reaching over, and therefore he went clockwise the wrong way to the left. Everything is kaptur of aferach, very clear. That brings us to the two dots halfway down on Nuntes Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Masnitzan money. Skip the two dots there. Rabbi Eliezer Omer b'makomo ha'omenu machate. We said that Rabbi Eliezer said that he had to stand there. He didn't have to walk. He just had to stand there. Remember, the mizbech was very small. Says the Gemara, Masnitzan money. Who is our Mishnah like? So that's a strange question. It's Rabbi Eliezer because it says Rabbi Eliezer Omer. So why are you asking who this is like? So what we didn't know is that the two of the Talmidim of Rabbi Eliezer had a machlokas as to how to understand the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. So what we're going to see now, we know that Rabbi Eliezer is the author of our Mishnah, but according to which of his Talmidim is the nuance of our Mishnah? That's subject to a machlokas, Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Meir. Says the Gemara, Masnitzan money, it's Rabbi Yehuda. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? Tanya, how did these two students misunderstand their Rebbe? Rabbi Meir Omer, that Rabbi Eliezer Omer, b'makomo ominu machate, that part is correct, but where does he do the smearing? Ve'al kulan hayano saying mimala lamata. On all of the corners, he would start up and then smear downwards. Chutz me'oso shebe'alachson, except for the one that was opposite him, catty corner to where he was, sheno saying mimata lamala. So let's assume that he was standing right here. So then he would smear here, and then here. Here he would do the opposite direction. Instead of doing down up, he would do up. Instead of doing down up, he would do up down, and then another regular smear. So the one that was opposite him was the one that was difficult to do down up for the smearing. But Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda argues with Rabbi Meir and says, you misunderstood Rabbi. What did Rabbi Eliezer say? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, I agree with you on that, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir, you did good there, but here was your mistake. Ve'al kulan hu no say milamata lamala. On all of the corners, the smearing was done from down to up. Chutz mizu shahaisa lefan of mamish, except for the one that was immediately in front of him, not catty corner to him, immediately in front of him. And he did it this way to make sure that it would not get dirty. It was down to up. Why was it down to up? Because what happens if you're holding a liquid in your hand and you raise your arm? The liquid drips down your arm. And when you're wearing a sleeve, that's super annoying. And when you're wearing begadim levanim, it's going to get very dirty. So what they did is they had him hold it, but they would quickly smear downwards so that there wasn't time for the liquid using the gravity as he's moving up for the liquid to drip down his arm to be nisafsan money, to get his clothes dirty. And that is why our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that he did the corner that was closest to him in a different way, of up to down. Whereas Rabbi Meir had a different opinion. So therefore, as our Mishnah opened halfway down, Rabbi Yehuda, he is like the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. And then, after he did the smearing, then the avods of the Kohanim took another turn, which is that he did the smearing on the Mizbech, but then he had to do hazah. Then he had to do a sprinkling, smearing and now sprinkling. So tells the Gemara, what's the pasuk? He had to do a sprinkling on the holy part of the Mizbech, my taharo. So let's see. Amar Rabba bar of Shila, palge de Mizbech. It's the halfway point of the Mizbech. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is almost exactly halfway down on the page. Dibur hamaschil apalge de Mizbech be'emtza gova koslo. What we're talking about is the height of the Mizbech. So if this were 3D, the height of the Mizbech Says the Gemara, Taharo is the halfway mark on the height of the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara, like people say, Tahar Tiara, when the sun shines, when it's very bright outside, Yoma, then we know it's the halfway point of the day. When the sun is right overhead, it's extremely bright. It's also bright for the rest of the day. What exactly did they mean? I don't know. It was a catchphrase that they used. Whenever we see Kida Amre Inshi, it means that it was catchphrases that people would use. And the Gemara says that therefore we know that it was halfway up the height of the Mizbeach. But then the Gemara, 2/3 of the way down, 2 lines before the wide lines, Mesibe, hold on 1 second. You're saying it's halfway up the height of the Mizbeach. That's not correct. What did the Brisa say? Mesibe, Kshehu when he does this hazah, the hazah after the smearing, which is done on the Mizbeach hazahav, Eino mazeh lo al gabe ha'efer v'lo al gabe ha'gechalim. You're not allowed to sprinkle on top of the ash, and you're not allowed to sprinkle on top of the coals. You have to clear a space on the top of the Mizbeach. But what is extremely clear from this brisa? It's not on the side of the Mizbeach. Our Havamin in the Gemara was when we said it's Taharo, that it's halfway up the height of the Mizbeach. But this Mishnah, this brisa says that that's not correct. This brisa says that what are you supposed to do? Move over some of the coals and some of the ash from the top of the Mizbeach, and that's where you do the sprinkling. Therefore, the Gemara acquiesces and says, first of the long lines, Al Amar Rabba bar of Shila, Al Geluya de Mizbeach. You're right. You should do it on an open place on the top of the Mizbeach, not halfway up the height of the Mizbeach, K'dichsiv, as the pasuk writes, Uche'etzem hashamayim latohar, that it should be toward the shamayim, upwards on the top side, the side that faces the shamayim, and that is where one should do the sprinkling. So we've done a lot of different avodos. Let's just review. Here in the Aron, Bein Abadim, we did the Ktores. We did the sprinkling of the dam of the par. We did the sprinkling of the dam of the seir. Then we came out, and then on this side of the paroches, we did the sprinkling of the par. We did the sprinkling of the seir. And then by the Mizbech also, sprinkling of the par. And the sprinkling of the seir, we spoke about that yesterday. And here we do smearing of the blood and then another sprinkling. A lot of action going on in the Beis HaMikdash. So says the Gemara, let's continue 2 lines down. Tanya, this is a great brisa, 2 lines into the wide lines. Hananya Omer, B'tzad Svoni, who knows saying, where does he do the actual haza'ah? So he does all the smearing. He does it here on the northern side. This is where he does the sprinkling facing southward. He sprinkles this way onto the Mizbeach, but from the north side. Reb Yossi Omer B'tzad Dromi who knows. He says, no, this sprinkling is done from the south side of the Mizbeach facing north. B'mai kamiflage. So check out how we're going to connect 2 different machlokos. Right now, the machlokos we have is whether or not the sprinkling that's done after the smearing is done on the north side of the Mizbeach or done on the south. Now we're going to connect it to a different machlokos as to where was the opening of the paroches. Take a look at the Gemara, 3 lines into the wide lines. B'mai kamiflage. What were Hananya and Rabbi Yossi arguing about? Mar Savar, according to one shita, Pischa b'darom kai. The opening by the paroches was on the darom, was on the south. So what does that mean? So take a look at his walking pattern. Here's what he'd do. He would go, he was in here. He would leave from the south. And we said he'd be yotza, he had to pass the Mizbeach. He would come over here and he would do his zrikos. And where would he finish? Invariably, whichever way you go, you end up finishing, if you go this way, you end up finishing here. And if you go the other way, you end up finishing here. But either way, you're finishing on the north side. Now, where are you standing? On the north side. So because the opening of the paroches was on the southern side, and therefore you had to start on the southern side, by definition, after you finished the smearing, you were on the north side. So therefore you do the zrika on the north side. It's inappropriate to go to another side of the Mizbeach because that would not be appropriate because of Ein Ma'avir and Ala Mitzvos. So if the opening of the paroches was on the southern side, and then you started the smearing on the southern side, you'd finish the smearing on the northern side, and then perfect. Do your zrika on the north side. That's what it means when it says that the opening was on the south, and therefore the smearing was on the south. It started there. The smearing would finish on the north. Zrikas hadam is now on the north. That's shita number 1. However, says the Gemara, shita number 2 is a little different. Umar Savar, 4 lines into the wide lines, Pischa b'tzafon kai. The other shita was of the opinion, this is the shita of Rabbi Yossi, that I think it's Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, let's see what he said here. Rabbi Yossi says, B'tzad Dromi. Yeah, Rabbi Yossi says that you did the sprinkling on the south. So what did he do? He started here. He said the opening of the paroches was on the other side. So he exited the paroches on the north. He would come over to this far corner and start. And since he was starting on the north, he'd finish his zrikos on the south. He'd finish his smearing on the south, and then he'd do his zrikos right there. So this machlokes of which side the zrika was on was dependent on whether or not the opening of the parochas was on the north or the south. Beautiful. So that's what the Gemara says. Where are we? We're a few lines down into the wide lines. And says the Gemara, the Kuli Almamia, Hecha de Gamran Matanos de Kranos, Hatsam Yoival Gago. Everyone agrees that wherever you'd finish the smearing, the Matanos, Hecha de Gamran Matanos, whichever side you'd finish the smearing on, north, if you finished on the north, you do the zrikos on the north. If you finished on the south, everyone agrees that you would do it on the south. So everyone says, Hecha de Gamran Matanos de Kranos, Hasam Yoival Gago. My time. What's the reason? Says the Gemara. Because that place where you are is a special place. Amar Kra, the Tiaro Vikidisho, Makom Shekitsho Sham Tiro, the place where you did the holy stuff, namely the smearing. That's where you would do the Taro, where you would do the Hazah. Beautiful. So that explains that piece of Gemara. That brings us to the Gemara 4/5 of the way down, about 12 lines from the bottom of the page at the two dots. Shiur hadam hayeshofech hayesod ma'aravi shamizbeach hachitzon. So now we're going to talk about where we discard the blood. So the structure of the Beis Hamikdash of the mizbeach on the outside is that you would go out of the ulam right here. It's a little hard to see. You go out of the ulam, and then the large mizbeach was there. Now I put a dotted line here. And I put the mizbeach north of the line. We'll discuss that in a couple of minutes. But here's an important fact to know. There was only a base surrounding the mizbeach on the western wall and on the southern wall. There was no yesod on the other two sides. And at each of these yesods, there were holes in the ground for the blood to drain into. So that's why anytime we see that the blood was put el yesod ha-mizbeach, it has to either be the southern wall or the western wall of the Mizbeach HaGadol. Okay, let's dig in. Says the Gemara, Shiari Hadam, if there was extra blood, so then, if there was extra blood after you did your smearing and sprinkling, you'd walk out, the Kohen Gadol would walk out of the Heichal, walk out of the Ulam, and this, what was the first thing he saw? The western side of the outer Mizbeach. So there's a Yisod there. Great. So go dump the blood right there. That's what the Mishnah says. And then the Gemara explains itself. The Gemara says, the Amar Kra, Beskol Dam Hapar Yishpoch, the Chinatik, when he leaves, namely when he leaves the Heichal and the Ulam, which Yisod does he encounter first? Behahu Paga Beresha. When he walks out, it's the Western Yisod that he passes first. Therefore, the expulsion of all of that blood should be on the Western Yisod, Yisod Ma'aravi. V'shamizbeach hachitzon hayashofech al Yisod Jeromis. However, if one were to have been doing an avoda outside of the Beis Hamikdash, outside of the Heichal itself, regular chatos, whatever it was, then that blood would go on the southern side. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabban, and the Brisa writes 10 lines from the bottom. Yisod hamizbeach ze Yisod Jeromis. When a person does an avoda outside of the Heichal or korban chatos, whatever it was, that blood, when there was extra blood, was always poured on the southern wall by the Yisod on the southern wall. Ata Omer Yisod Deromis, you say that it's on the southern wall when you have a chatas and there's extra blood, you pour it on the Yisod Deromis. O Einu El Yisod Ma'aravis. Maybe we should say that really you should put it on the western wall. Says the Gemara, no, Amris, Yelamed Yeridaso Min HaKevesh Liyatziyaso Me'HaHeichal. We should learn about how to do the blood pouring of extra blood outside of the Heichal from what we did inside the Heichal. What did we do? When you walked out, what was the first thing you saw? You saw the western wall. Western wall. You saw the western side of the Mizbeach, the western Yisod. And the same would be true when you would come down the Kevesh. You'd come down the Kevesh and the ramp, and the first thing you'd see is the southern wall. So therefore, you would dump all of the blood from all of the korbanos that were done outside of the Heichal. That blood would be put here. So namely, the only blood that was seemingly ever put on the western Yisod was blood that came out of the Heichal, because that was the only time that Paga Beresha, that was the only time the blood would hit the western Yisod first. So says the Gemara, Ma yitziyaso min ha'heichal b'samuchlo. Just like when one would leave the heichal, they would put the blood b'samuchlo. Ve'ezeh, which yisod was that? Ze yisod ma'aravi. That's the western yisod that he would encounter first. Af yiridaso min ha'kevesh b'samuchlo. So too, when you come down the ramp, what were you then closest to? The yisod that was the southern yisod. Ve'ezeh ze sod deromi. Beautiful. Tanya, take 7 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, no. We don't agree with this. Yisod ma'aravi. According to Rabbi Yishmael, both the extra blood from inside the Heichal and the extra blood from outside the Heichal was always put here on the Western Yesod. Machlokes, Reb Shimon ben Yochai, Omer, Zebezeh Yesod Deromi. No, it's not going to be that when it's the Heichal, it's the West, and when it's outside the Heichal, it's the Southern Yesod. This machlokes is drastically different because Rabbi Shmuel's of the opinion that all bloods that are extraneous get dumped on the Western Yesod, and Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says no, all bloods that are extraneous are on the Southern Yesod. So then says the Gemara, Bishlama Rabbi Shmuel, I could understand the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel who says that all bloods, the extra blood from the Heichal and the extra blood from outside the Heichal get dumped on the Western Yesod. Why? Because we can say that the sasum, the unknown of where the blood should go, halachically speaking at least, the psukim are not clear about where the blood should go from a korban that's outside. Maybe we should learn it from what we know already, which is that it's from the inside. What did we know about the Heichal? Dvarim pshutim, that's for sure going to go on the west. We know that. What do we not know? Blood of achatos, blood of other korbanos. Something good. Let's learn one from the other. Everything should be on the western side. Good, that I understand. Ela Reb Shimon ben Yochai, my taima. But according to Reb Shimon ben Yochai, what type of svara do you have that everything should be on the southern wall? At the very least, when you walk out of the Heichal, the first thing you see is the western side of the Yesod. Says the Gemara, a seemingly difficult answer. My time. Well, what's the reason why? Amar Rav Ashi, kasavar hischa b'darom koi. He says that the opening of the ulam. This is why I drew this dotted line. When you walk out of the ulam, you don't actually hit the western side first. What you see first is the southern side. The whole mizbeach was actually elevated north above the center line. This is a very difficult shita in light of previous things that we've learned, because we learned, according to another shita, that the whole mizbeach was south of this center line, and still a third shita that it was approximately centered. So this is a difficult shita to understand. And by the way, even if it's true that it's north of that center line, so what? You still get to the western yesod first. It's still in front. It's right there. Even if it's north of the center line in the southern walls. But when you walk out, I'm still closer to the western yesod than the southern. It's a difficult piece of Gemara. Okay, says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. They were teaching the halachos of Rabbi Shmuel, his shita, that it's both on the western wall, and they were teaching it b'debei Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. They were teaching it in the yeshiva Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and they said zeh v'zeh yisod dromis. And what do we see here? That Rabbi Shmuel changed his mind to agree that it's never the western wall. It's always going to be the southern yesod. And whether or not the extra blood is from the heichal, or if the blood is from the chatos, doesn't make a difference. Blood always goes on the southern yesod. It says the Gemara, v'simanich mashchuha gavrei legavra. The gavrei in plural, the men changed the mind of the man. Namely, the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai changed the mind of Rabbi Shmuel by saying that the whole mizbeach was elevated above the halfway line, and that brings us to the 2 dots, 2 lines from the bottom of the page. Says the Gemara, Elu ve'elu mitzarvin be'ama. When you do pour the blood onto the yesod and it drips into the holes, and then it drips into the waterway that will then exit the Beis Hamikdash, we said that in the Mishnah, okay, then it's subject to me'ilah. So says the Gemara. Hold on one second. Tanu Rabbanan, Mo'alin b'damim divrei Reb Meir. Reb Meir was of the opinion that there is me'ilah. The Chachamim omrim, Reb Shimon v'Chachamim omrim ein mo'alin b'hem. But the other shita says that there is no me'ilah when it comes to blood. So we're going to talk about this discussion. We've actually had this discussion before, and we're going to dig in yet one more time all over again. Ein mo'alin, and this brings us to the top of the Testament Beis. As mentioned, we're going to be going to the Mishnah on Samech Amud Aleph. Let's continue. Says the Gemara, Ad kan lo pligi elabit midrabanan. We're only talking on a rabbinic level. But midoraisa, aval midoraisa ein mo'alin. Everyone agrees midoraisa ein mo'alin behind that there's no me'ilah by blood. Immediately, how do we know that this is true? Because we have a number of psukim quoted by a number of different amoraim and a number of different psukim. Amar Ula, Amar Kra, the pasuk says lachem, the blood. When you do the blood's for you. Shalachem yehe. That's in order to generate kapara for you. You can't do me'ilah with something that belongs to you. The blood's yours. It was yours for your kapara. Done. Debei Rabbi Shimon Tana lechaper. The pasuk says lechaper. Lechaparon etativ. I gave it for your kapara. V'lo leme'ilah. Rav Yochanan Amar Kra. Who? The pasuk says who? Lifnei kapara kel achar kapara. Here we make a comparison to hekesh. The comparison of before the kapara to after the kapara. Ma le'achar kapara after the kapara has been achieved by the hazas hadam or by the smearing of the blood, ein bo me'ila. The mitzvah was done already. There's no me'ila after the mitzvah is done. Lifnei kapara ein bo me'ila. Then even beforehand, we'll make a hekesh and say that therefore there is no me'ila with blood at all. Says the Gemara, maybe not. 4 lines from the bottom of the New Testament base. Ve'ema la'achar kapara kelifnei kapara. Maybe we should make the hekesh in the other direction. How so? Ma lifnei kapara yesh bo me'ila. Before you do kapara, the blood's not yours. Before you do kapara, there is me'ila because that still belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Until you do the zrika, the blood's not yours. So then 3 lines, but before the end of the page, maybe we should assume even afterwards that there's still me'ila by the dam. And therefore, maybe midoraisa there really is me'ila by blood. Says the Gemara, no. Once a mitzvah is done, me'ila is off the table. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Vilo, I can give you a great example. Says the Gemara, last 3 words on the Testament base. Take a look at Rashi. Last Rashi on the page. What does Rashi say? The pasuk says you should put the ash next to the mizbeach, and the drasha that we made many times already in Shas, the tone geniza, needs to be buried. Alma, what does it imply if it needs to be buried? Aser behana, then you're not allowed to benefit from it. V'kevan de behana aser mishum kedushaso, it must be the me'ila nami ispe. Because it's so holy that you can't benefit from it, it must be that there's an Isser Me'ila. You wanted to say in the Gemara that there's no such thing as Me'ila after a mitzvah is performed. You're wrong. Trumas Hadeshen is the example. That's going to be the thorn in the side. Why? Because Trumas Hadeshen still has Me'ila after the mitzvah is done. The mitzvah is Haramas Hadeshen, I'm done. I moved it, it's over. No, it's not over. There's an Isser Hana and therefore an Isser Me'ila. Says the Gemara, no. You can't learn. You're right about the halacha. You're right that there's Nisar Hana. That's true. You're right that there's Me'ila. But you can't learn anything from there. Why? Top of Samach Hamad Aleph. These 2 psukim are exceptions to the rule. And when there are 2 psukim that teach something, it's like saying the following. Okay, all of you in the room, person number 1 and person number 2, you're invited for the meal. What's implied? The rest of you are not. So that's what the Gemara is saying here. When you have a pasuk that's explicit by 2 different halachos, so once we have 2 halachos that say one thing, that there's still an Isser Me'ila after the mitzvah, because it only says it by 2 areas, and it says it specifically by 2 areas, therefore no other mitzvos, no other Isurim have that Isser anymore. So there is Me'ila by Chumas Hadeshen, there is Me'ila by Big Day Kahuna, but you cannot learn anything out about blood because the halacha is that Shnei Ktuvin Habayin Ke'echad. You have 2 psukim that teach us that these are the exceptions. You cannot learn from those 2 things. They remain the exception and not the rule. So therefore, Trumas Hadeshen and Big Day Kahuna have an Isser Me'ila, but blood does not, and that's where we want it. That's a good answer. So it says the Gemara, Samach Hamad Aleph, 3 lines down. That's all fine and good, according to the shita that says that when the pasuk says v'hinicham sham, then malamdim tetunim geniza. That's great. If you want to say that the begadim of the kohen that they need to be put into geniza, and therefore there's Nisr Me'ila, you're right that it's Shnei Ksuvin Abayin Ke'echad. You have the Isser Me'ila by Trumas Hadeshen and Isser Me'ila by the Big Day Kohen. However, Rabbi Dos has another shita on the begadim of the kohanim. What does he say? Elo the Reb Dosi Damar Big Day Kahuna Ru'uyin Hein LeKohen Hedyod. No, Reb Dosi says that the clothes of the Kohen Gadol can be used for a Kohen Hedyod. What does that show you? That there's no Isser Me'ila. And what does that mean? It means that now there's only Trumas Hadeshen that has an Isser Me'ila after the mitzvah, and now we're really stuck because now we have a precedent for a mitzvah having been completed and still having Me'ila. You can't say Shnei Ktuvin Abayin Ke'echad because that other pasuk, according to Reb Dosa, there's no Isser Me'ila there. And therefore, kasha on the Gemara, maybe we should say that blood has an Isser Me'ila. Says the Gemara, no, it's true that even according to Rav Dosa, it's true that there would be no Me'ila by the Big Day Kohen Gadol. However, there's another pasuk that Rabbi Dosa holds as part of the Isser Me'ila, and that is Trumas Hadeshen is number 1, like we said, and Egla Arufa is number 2. And therefore, we're back to our answer, which is don't worry about the blood. The blood is the rule, and Trumas Hadeshen is the exception to the rule. So says the Gemara, we have a more fundamental problem than all of this, which is that I could understand if you say that when you have 2 psukim that highlight a halacha that therefore you can't extrapolate from those two to others. But not everybody holds that way. Says the Gemara, according to those who say that even when you have two psukim that highlight the same halacha, that has an Isser Me'ila after the mitzvah, and that has an Isser Me'ila after the mitzvah. But there's a sheet in the Tanaim that holds that you can still learn from those exceptions to other cases. So then why in our case would we say that there's no Isser Me'ila by Dam after the Zrikas Hadam? Says the Gemara, because there's extra psukim there. That's for a detailed reason, for a technical reason in the pasuk. Last sugya for the night. That's really all connected. Why do we have three different psukim that speak about blood? So says the Gemara, one teaches you that yes, blood is usher to eat. However, no, there is no isser of nosar. If one were to consume blood after the expiration time, they would not have violated the isser of nosar. They would have violated the isser of eating blood, but not nosar. Another is this example, which is our case, which is to make an exception and say that there is no isser of me'ila, that if a person were to eat blood, even if the meat was subject to me'ila, but the blood is not subject to me'ila. And last but not least, that even if the animal was tummy, but the consumption of the blood, it doesn't have the same isser status of tuma. Aval, mi pigul, when it comes to pigul, there, lo tzarch lemu'ute kra. We didn't need a fourth pasuk to talk about blood to teach us to exclude pigul. Why not? Because Ditznan, 3 lines before the Mishnah, kol sheyesh lo matirin, anything that has the capacity to create a matir. What is the matir by an animal? It's the blood. It's the blood. It's the rikat sadam. So then, bein la'adam, bein l'mizbech, chayav and alav mishum pigo. That I don't need a pasuk. That you're going to be chayav on if there's davar sheyesh lo matirin. However, the dam atzmo matir, because the blood was the matir, the dam itself is not subject to the isser of pigul. So therefore, we did not need a pasuk there. We're going to stop right here at the Mishnah. I'll be recording somewhere in the middle of the day tomorrow and posting. I'll send a message in our WhatsApp group wishing you all a beautiful night.